Hello. Why Born-Hilborn history selection is more sensical than random Copenhagen collapse. The central failure of the Copenhagen interpretation is not merely that it leaves us with measurement as a mysterious primitive. Its deeper failure is that it treats collapse as an apparently random selection of an outcome while ignoring the far more serious implication. Every selected outcome requires a selected history. If Schrodinger's cat is observed alive, then reality does not merely select alive, reality selects a complete prior history in which the cat remained alive. If the cat is observed dead, then reality selects a complete prior history in which the cat died. Copenhagen pretends the magic is in the moment of measurement, but the real magic and the real problem is historical. When you open the box, you are not just choosing whether the cat is alive or dead. You are choosing the whole story that made it alive or dead. Copenhagen interpretation says this happens randomly. Born-Hilborn interpretation says no, history is selected by quantum possibility multiplied by expectation across spacetime. QM equals expectations across, or QM times expectations across spacetimes equals reality. That is more logical, more satisfying, and far less ridiculous than pretending the universe throws cosmic dice and then quietly manufactures a matching past randomly. Schrodinger's cat was supposed to make quantum superposition look absurd at the macroscopic level, a cat both alive and dead until observation. But the joke rebounds unto Copenhagen itself. If Copenhagen says the cat has no definite state until measurement, then it also implies the cat has no definite history until measurement. The issue is not just life in superposition, the issue is history in superposition. The aliveness or deadness of the cat is only the surface beneath it. Beneath it is the entire causal chain. The atom decaying or not decaying, the poison releasing or not releasing, the cat breathing or not breathing, the body warming or cooling, the heart beating or stopping. Copenhagen does not merely give us an undecided cat, it gives us an undecided history. So the cat is not the real absurdity. The real absurdity is pretending only the final label matters, alive or dead. That is childish. A dead cat needs a death history. A living cat needs a life history. You cannot select a cat's condition without selecting the chain of events that made that condition true. That is why the correct focus is not the outcome selection. The correct focus is history selection. The Born-Hilborn interpretation begins exactly there. It keeps the valid mathematical skeleton of quantum mechanics, the Born rule. The Born rule gives us the ordinary quantum weight of possible outcomes, but Born-Hilborn says the Born rule alone is incomplete as an explanation of reality because probability alone cannot explain why one complete world history becomes actual. Therefore, the Hilborn rule adds expectation weight across the space-time block. Reality is not merely the Born rule. Reality is the Born rule multiplied by expectations across space-time, including future expectation. The short version is this. Reality equals QM times expectations across space-time, or reality equals the Born rule multiplied by the Hilborn rule. The Born rule tells us what is quantum possible. The Hilborn rule tells us how expectation gives weight to one possible history over another. Copenhagen gives you random collapse. Born-Hilborn gives you weighted history selection. This is why Born-Hilborn is not a decorative idea. It is a direct correction to the central weakness of Copenhagen. Copenhagen says collapse happens, but it does not give an intellectually satisfying reason why this outcome, this world, this random history. Born-Hilborn supplies the missing principle. A selected reality is the coherent history whose quantum availability and spacetime expectation weight combine most strongly. That is a history selection model, not a random outcome lottery. Imagine the universe as a library of possible histories. Copenhagen says one book falls off the shelf at random when someone looks. Born-Hilborn says you chose the book. The book is weighted by quantum structure and by expectations across time, including future versions of ourselves. Some books fit the future better, some histories satisfy the expectation structure of consciousness, memory, biology, and observers more coherently. That is not random magic, that is selection. The key is that the universe, if understood through relativity, is not merely a little present moment crawling forward. The block universe picture treats past, present, and future as parts of one space-time structure. Einstein-Minkowski eternalism. If the future is real within that fuzzy structure, then future observer states cannot simply be dismissed as non-existent. Future expectations can be treated as boundary conditions or weights within the total space-time selection. This makes retrocausality and teleology within physics logical instead of scandalous. The future is not just nothing yet in block universe. The future is part of the whole shape. So future minds expect to exist, breathe, love, reproduce, remember, build, and think. Those expectations can help weight the histories that make those future facts possible. The future does not need to shove atoms around with tiny ghost hands. It simply contributes to which complete history is selected, which complete history makes the most sense to our present now. This is where Copenhagen becomes deeply unsatisfying. Copenhagen gives randomness sovereign power over history. Your 5th birthday is created by random, according to Copenhagen, every time you open your eyes. It says that when collapse occurs, the world becomes definite, according to probabilistic selection. But if collapse makes the world definite, then it makes the past definite as well. That means Copenhagen interpretation accidentally implies random history selection. Copenhagen interpretation equals random history selection. It gives chance the authority to select not only what happens now, but what must have happened before. This is an extraordinary claim, usually smuggled past the audience because everyone is staring at the alive or dead cat. Born-Hilborn says, stop staring only at the cat's pulse. Look at the history that you've just made of that cat. Copenhagen says a random measurement picks alive or dead. Born-Hilborn says every measurement selects a coherent space-time history, and if history is being selected, then history should not be selected by naked chance alone. It should be selected by quantum possibility plus expectation weight. That is the improvement. That is the only way we can resolve all paradox in the reality that we experience, by putting the observer back inside the ever-continuous experiment. This is why history selection must be repeated until the room understands it. History selection is the key. History selection is the missing logic. History selection is what turns quantum collapse from random embarrassment into a coherent principle. Every observation is not merely a spotlight shining on a pre-written fact, nor is it merely a slot machine spitting out a result. It is a selection among possible histories. Whenever you close your eyes, the unobserved world is no longer personal, fixed in your experience. If you close your eyes, you put the universe inside of a Schrodinger's box. Thought experiment. When you open them again, you do not merely receive an image, you receive the world with continuity. The chair is still there. The room has a past. The clock has moved. The people around you have continued through a consistent chain of events. In Born-Hilborn language, this is how time operates. Your experience is constantly participating in the stabilization of coherent history. Opening your eyes after every blink collapses our global consistency. This does not mean the universe disappears like a cheap magic trick whenever you blink. It means reality is not known to you as isolated dots. It is known as a continuous selected history. Every moment arrives with a past and future attached. Every observation says, here is the world, and here is the history that made this world coherent. That is history selection. Now we can approach consciousness. Under materialism, consciousness is often treated as an accidental secretion of the brain activity, as though the brain sweats mind the way skin sweats water. But if observation and expectation participate in the selection of history, the mind is not a decorative byproduct. It's too big for brain body. Mind is part of the weighting structure of reality. Thought is not merely an electrical twitch inside meat. Thought is expectation pressure within the space-time selection process. This history selection process weights the thoughts that force us to think them. This makes brain-body too small for the temporal aspects of mind in this idealism mathematics of consciousness interpretation. Thoughts matter because thoughts weigh histories. Expectation is not just wishful thinking. Expectation also means faith. In Born-Hilborn, expectation is part of the mathematics by which possible histories become actual. Consciousness is not sitting outside physics, begging for permission to exist. Consciousness is inside the selection rule. It is the physics. It is the mathematics. Consciousness is physics and mathematics and science. It's not biology. This also explains memory more satisfactory than the crude brain storage assumption. Standard thinking imagines memory as a set of physical files stored somewhere in the brain, but no one has ever shown a complete literal memory file sitting in a neuron like a photograph in a drawer. The brain clearly participates in recall, organization, injury association, and expression, but that does not prove the brain is the ultimate storage container of memory. In a history selection model, memory is better understood as access to selected history within CPT comparative ledger symmetry, as access to the selected history itself. But memory is not necessarily stuff in your head. Memory may be your present mind accessing the history that your present reality requires. The brain is the receiver, filter, and biological interface. The deeper memory is the selected spacetime ledger. That is why Born-Hilborn can explain memory without shrinking it into a wet filing cabinet nobody has yet discovered. This also explains the flow of time, a topic for another video. But clearly we are steered by a past we recall, an expectation weight from a future we cannot see. This is where CPT-style comparative ledger symmetry becomes useful. Minds need something to compare things against. If a present observer state is linked to a consistent past, then memory functions as a symmetry relation between the present and selected history. The past is not a dead pile of gone moments. It is the coherent history attached to the present. Memory is the mind's relation to that selected history. History selection is an odd topic. It means our 5th birthday may not have gone as we remember. A person remembers because the present self is connected to a past self. In the same selection history, damage the brain and you damage the interface. You do not necessarily prove the memory was manufactured locally. Smash a radio and the music stops. An ape is forced to believe singers live inside the radio. We need to hope that humans are smarter. Now, teleology or intelligent design. Yes, I said intelligent design in a mathematics and physics video. The forbidden word materialists often treat like contagious disease. Teleological creationism means direction, aim, or purpose. Copenhagen interpretation cannot handle teleology because random collapse has no direction beyond probability and dice. Darwinism materialism often reduces biological history to accident plus selection. But Born-Hilborn introduces a lawful way to understand purpose. Future expectation weighs past compatible histories. Teleological creationism becomes history selection under future boundary conditions. This is not cartoon religion. This is not a wizard designing thumbs in a cloud workshop. This is mathematics. Future functions weight earlier histories that make those functions possible. We need thumbs, so we live as crabs. The future organism expecting to breathe weights histories involving air, gas, exchange, plants, oxygen, lungs, and respiration. The future hand expects to grip weights and histories involving claws, grasping, manipulation, and thumbs. So the crab matters. The crab claw is not literally a human thumb, but it functions. It occupies a related region of possibility space. Grip pressure, manipulation, holding. In Born-Hilborn history selection, the future thumb expectation can weight earlier grip histories where we personally had to live lifetimes as crabs to learn these things. Crabs become primitive rehearsal of grasping. The thumb is not random debris. It is a later refinement of a history that has been weighted towards manipulation. This mathematics, reality equals QM multiplied by spacetime expectations, period, suggests we personally must live as crabs because a God version of us, you, expect thumbs whenever you look or hold a screwdriver. Adding weight to that selected history, where you have a screwdriver. We wanted hands before we had hands because the future version of us exists in the block universe expecting hands. That expectation helps us select histories where life practices gripping, crabs pinch, mammals grasp, humans write and use screwdrivers. The function echoes backward through history. That is teleological creationism described as history selection. The same applies to plants and breathing. Plants are not just green background decoration for animals. Plants are part of the selected respiratory history of life. They transform atmosphere. They participate in oxygen, carbon, sunlight, and metabolism. If future breathing organisms are part of the space-time block, then their existence waits the history in which breathing becomes possible. Life as plants becomes a preparatory chapter in the history of lungs. A materialist sees a plant and says, accident, boo-boo. Born-Hilborn sees a plant and says, early breath equation, baby human. The forest is not just scenery, it is the selected ancestry of breathing. The lung did not fall from nowhere, it arrived through a history weighted toward breathing. Sex drive also becomes intelligible in this model. In ordinary biology and psychology, sex drive is explained through reproduction and survival. That is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Born-Hilborn adds the future. If future people expect to exist, then histories in which their ancestors reproduce gain expectation weight and force us to date and breed and have families. The future child, future adult, future civilization, and future observer all become part of the selected pressure on the past that makes them possible. I'm describing a reality that may sound a little cold and distant from our brain, but there's a lot of beauty to what I'm saying also. Our parents did not merely reproduce because blind chemistry twitched correctly in the history selection model. Your future existence weights the history in which your ancestors had the drive, opportunity, and biological compulsion to create you. Sex drive is not just animal appetite, it is future-weighted history demanding its existence. This is why Born-Hilborn resolves more than a narrow quantum puzzles. It gives one principle for quantum collapse, consciousness, memory, thought, sex drive, teleology, and intelligent design. The principle is always the same. Possible histories are not all equally realized. They are selected by quantum possibility multiplied by expectation across spacetime. That is why the model is more satisfying than Copenhagen. Copenhagen gives randomness. Born-Hilborn gives coherence. Copenhagen says the universe rolls dice and then acts surprised that a consistent history appears. Born-Hilborn says the universe selects the history that best satisfies quantum structure and expectation weight. One is a shrug disguised as physics. The other one is an explanatory model. Many worlds tries to escape collapse by saying all outcomes occur in branching worlds. Schrodinger's cat lives in one branch and dies in another, but this merely exports the problem into an infinite warehouse of unobservable branches. Born-Hilborn does not require endless cats, endless rooms, endless yous, and endless histories multiplied like metaphysical rabbits. It says many histories are possible, but one coherent history is selected. So many worlds is also silly, and I do another video on that also. So in plain worlds, Copenhagen and many worlds are the wrong approach. Copenhagen says one book falls off the shelf randomly. Born-Hilborn says the selected book is the one weighted by quantum possibility and expectation across time. That is cleaner. That is more satisfying. That is why history selection matters. The Froschinger-Renner style paradoxes and Wigner's friend puzzles expose the same weakness. Observers can be treated as weightless clerks operating outside the reality. Observers are inside the quantum story. Their expectations, memories, and measurements become part of the system. Born-Hilborn improves this by refusing to treat all observers as equal, empty, interchangeable, and interchangeable measurement devices. Observers carry weight. Weighted observer collapse, WOC. My mathematics resolves all paradox in physics. This completes QM. A positive thinking Schrodinger and a negative thinking Schrodinger are not identical observer weights in this model. Expectation matters. The observer is not a passive camera. The observer is a weighted participator in history. Your thoughts matter. Weighted observer collapse, WOC. The great mistake of standard discussion is that physicists speak as though measurement is only a technical operation. Even a machine might suffice, but measurement is inseparable from expectation. Comparison from any loci of comparison, memory, and observer state. To observe is to stabilize a relationship between mind and world based on memory. In Born-Hilborn, that relation has weight. The observer is not outside the equation. The observer is one of the places where the equation becomes real. History selection model must replace the lazy phrase collapse. Collapse sounds like a curtain falling. History selection sounds like what is actually happening. One coherent space-time pathway becomes the experienced world. Collapse is the old world word. History selection is the cleaner term. Now let us return to Schrodinger's cat. Copenhagen asks us to accept that before observation the cat is in a strange, indefinite condition, and after observation one result appears randomly. But Born-Hilborn asks the adult question, what history did we just select? If the cat is alive, we selected a survival history. If the cat is dead, we select a death history. If history is selected, then the selection principle matters. Randomness is not enough. The cat is not merely alive or dead. The cat is a doorway into the structure of reality. It teaches that every definite present requires a definite past. It teaches that measurement is not just present selection. It teaches that history is that collapses history selection. And once history selection is understood, Copenhagen looks incomplete, random, and philosophically underpowered. Born-Hilborn is more sensical because it does not stop at the cat is alive. It asks why the entire history exists in which the cat is alive. It does not stop at the person remembers. It asks how memory attaches the present to selected history. It does not stop at life evolved thumbs. It asks how future grasping weighted earlier thumb histories. It does not stop at humans reproduce. It asks how future observers weight the sexual and biological histories that led to them. That is the unifying power of the Born-Hilborn interpretation. Reality is not random collapse. Reality is not infinite branching chaos. Reality is not dead matter accidentally hallucinating consciousness. Reality is history selection. History selection, and not by dice rolls. God does not play dice. God is a future you in this model, or collapse-weighted thought forms. The Born rule supplies the quantum possibility. The Hilborn rule supplies expectation across space-time. Together they select the coherent world we experience. That is why the equation is so simple. Reality equals the Born rule multiplied by space-time expectations, even from the future. Reality equals QM times space-time expectation. That is not a minor adjustment. It is the new way to understand what collapse means. It changes the question from which outcome appeared to which history was selected. And that change unlocks the whole structure: consciousness, memory, thought, sex drive, teleological creationism, intelligent design, retrocausality, and the unity of experienced reality. Copenhagen gave us a random cat. Born-Hilborn gave us a selected history. And history selection is the key to reality. The end. If you understand what this video said, you should try to teach it to your fellow man. Be blessed, blessed be.